Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
My wife kept thinking about him, but who is it? Today's story with a similar plot. Enjoy watching it. His broad shoulders were covered with well-developed muscles, and his long legs had strong calves. The narrow waist seemed too small to support his powerful upper body. He seemed to feel her gaze because he turned around and winked at her. She responded with a smile. As the door closed and the sound of the shower filled the room, she rolled onto her stomach and thought about the feelings that were just beginning to fade. It all seemed like a dream that she had just experienced. It was impossible for it to be real, but it was real, and that was the problem. Shelley Spaulding, a 36-year-old wife and mother, was only now beginning to realize what she had done. For the first time in her 15-year marriage, she had cheated on her husband, Jerry Spaulding. She had betrayed him, her daughter Tracy, and the sanctity of the wonderful family they shared. And she did it without thinking. Still, as the thought of what she had done entered her passion-clouded mind, she began to tremble. Her hands suddenly became cold, her mouth went dry, and her body, which had until now been the property of her husband and his alone, was no longer relaxed. She felt the urgent need to get up, get dressed, and leave. Panic began to take over, forcing her to move. She slid off the bed, frantically searched for her underwear, put them on, and then did the same with her skirt, blouse, and shoes. She stood up, found her purse and jacket, grabbed them, and rushed to the door, pulling it open just as the sound of the shower stopped. She walked out and closed the door quietly, so as not to attract his attention. She quickly walked down the hallway, up the steps to the first floor, and into the lobby. She looked around carefully and saw no one. She walked through the door, stepped forward without looking left or right, and got into a taxi, which took her back to her car. The dark blue Cadillac Escalade that Jerry had bought her for their 15th wedding anniversary drove her in soft, luxurious silence to their large house on Scotland Drive in the very wealthy section of Scottsdale, Arizona, which was her home. She pulled into the driveway, waited for the garage door to open, and drove inside. She turned off the ignition and sat still, letting her heart slow down and the sweat dry on her face. The ticking of the cooling engine broke the silence but did not ease the pain in her stomach. She felt a twisting pain and sat still, waiting for it to pass so she could regain some sense of control. She got out of the car and went inside, finding the house quiet and empty. Her daughter Tracy wasn't home yet because she had cheerleading practice that evening. Jerry was not supposed to return home until the day after tomorrow. Both facts were known to her when she agreed to meet Reed Cunningham at the hotel that afternoon. She knew that no one was waiting for her, and there was no one to lie to. She was free to betray everyone who trusted her. Shelley walked into the large open great room and sank into one of the soft leather chairs facing the fireplace that took up the entire south wall. The stone-clad wall rose 2 stories and disappeared into a beamed and vaulted ceiling 20 feet high. This had appeared as one of the articles in a recent issue of House Beautiful. Their home was considered one of the most beautiful in Scottsdale, and the architecture was praised as innovative and inspiring. However, none of this registered in her mind as she stared at the now dark 90-inch flat-screen TV located in the center of the entertainment center on either side of the fireplace. She worked as a secretary for Walter Kincaid, a candidate for the U.S. Senate from Arizona. She had been volunteering to help nominate him for the past 5 months, and 2 months ago, she met Reed Cunningham at one of the many fundraising events she had organized. He was very charming, very handsome, and did not hide the fact that he wanted to seduce her. She knew it, found it amusing at first, and then found it stimulating. She couldn't explain why, and it bothered her. His visits became more and more frequent, his attention more open and persistent, and she reciprocated all of it. A smile or a glance made her temperature rise. She had never felt this way before, not even with her husband. She should have stopped as soon as she felt the desire increase, but she didn't. Her obsession with Reed Cunningham began to grow and become all-consuming. When she was at home, she thought about him. As she lay in bed with her husband, she thought about Reed. The most amazing thing was that her feelings for Jerry, her husband, had changed. She became irritable with him. The thought of making love to him suddenly became disgusting. The man she loved and who had been her only person for most of her adult life suddenly became a stranger. She barely recognized him when she looked at him. Instead of the love she should have felt, she only felt an emptiness that only Reed could fill. All she knew was that she was dangerously close to agreeing to his offer to meet him outside of the campaign. This danger came true today when she said yes. What happened today was still a mystery to her. She was answering the phone when he entered. She smiled at him, and he came over to talk to her. After speaking briefly with a few of the PR staff, she took a break, and they went outside to get some fresh air. Reed did his usual thing, running his hand through her hair and touching her cheek. For some reason, something inside her shifted, and she couldn't say no anymore. She followed him into his car and back to his hotel. Once in his room, she forgot about Jerry and Tracy as his hands began to work their magic. They met several more times that day before she got up, dressed, and went home. It was almost 5:30 when the slam of the door brought her back to the present, which meant Tracy was home. She sighed, rose from her chair, and became a mother again. She felt a pang at the thought but then forgot when Tracy started telling her about her day and the new guy who had asked her out. Tracy was already deep into her story when Shelley began taking things out of the freezer to prepare a late dinner. Shelley busily prepared dinner, her thoughts elsewhere while her daughter talked and talked. Fortunately, Tracy did not pay attention to her mother and did not notice that sometimes her words fell on deaf ears. The two of them sat at the table and chatted while they ate the simple dinner she had prepared. Shelley thought it was nice to spend time with Tracy while they talked about things that concerned only them. She watched her daughter and felt the love she had for her. She loved her daughter and her life. She loved what they shared and the adventures her daughter had. Then she thought about Jerry and how he had worked so hard to provide these things for everyone. The thought brought a flash of pain and instant regret for what she had done that day. But then her thoughts filled with Reed Cunningham's face, and all the guilt disappeared. Tracy's words also disappeared. Tracy didn't notice the sudden change in her mother or the silence that followed until she fell silent, waiting for her mother to return with some comment about her story about Jason, with whom she was in love at that moment. But she looked up and saw her mother staring out the window, her mind clearly elsewhere. Offended, Tracy stood up, took her plate to the sink, and left the kitchen. Her mother barely noticed, which hurt Tracy more than she could imagine. But on the other hand, her mother had been acting like this for months now, and she was starting to worry. She decided to wait until her father came home and then talk to him. He would know what to do. After all, he was dead and could fix everything. Jerry Spaulding was one of those rare young men who discovered a very important secret while still in high school. He attended many talks at the high school gymnasium about getting an education, finding a good job, working hard, and having a career. You had to impress those above you so that you, in turn, could advance. He listened to every word but did not believe any of it. He didn't want to impress those above him. Yes, he wanted to work, but not for others. His attitude was completely different. Jerry knew what he wanted to do. He wanted to get rich working for the most important man in the world, himself. Instead of going to college and getting a trade after high school, Jerry went to the library and took a self-help class. There, he learned how to buy and sell real estate with minimal money but with the potential to make a lot. He read, studied, and researched more, and then decided to give it his best shot. He found an old duplex that someone wanted to sell because it was depreciating. They wanted to sell it to him at a good price, and Jerry decided to make his first deal. He lived at home with his father. His mother had died of cancer when he was 15. Jerry and his father had found a way to adjust to life as a couple. Although he was 18 and could negotiate contracts, he had no credit history, so he had to ask his father to guarantee him. His father was a very smart man and understood exactly what his son was up to. He fully approved of it and pledged his support with minimal resistance. He looked after his son, but very soon, he saw that Jerry knew what he was doing. Less than 2 months later, Jerry resold the property for a handsome profit. He paid off the loan quickly, found 2 more properties, and did the same again. He resold them and now had the money to start on his own, without his father. Jerry was on his way to riches and never looked back. By the age of 22, he was already a millionaire and on his way to even greater wealth. His company was doing bigger and bigger deals, and his name was well known in Scottsdale. He was often invited to parties where the wealthy entertained and made contacts. At one of these parties, thrown by someone important, he met Shelley Lambert. He fell hopelessly in love that same night and began to pursue her with the same determination he applied to everything. His only goal was to make her his. They dated for almost a year before Jerry proposed. Shelley was ready and accepted his offer. Her parents were school teachers, and they were impressed by Jerry's wealth and personality. They gave their blessing, and Jerry's father had already fallen in love with Shelley. He said he would be happy to have her as his new daughter. They planned the wedding and got married 3 months later. They were fortunate that Tracy was born afterward because Shelley and Jerry knew she was pregnant before the wedding. Everyone else accepted it, or at least pretended to. Time passed, and the trio continued to live as one of the wealthiest families in Scottsdale. Jerry and Shelley bought the house they now lived in when Tracy was 2 years old, and they had lived there ever since. They expanded their property several times, building a swimming pool, a large terrace with a grill and all amenities, and a large pond with water plants. All this turned their home into one of the showpieces that eventually ended up in the pages of House Beautiful magazine. Although they didn't avoid Shelley getting pregnant again, it didn't happen. When they went to the clinic to find out what the problem might be, they were told that Shelley was unlikely to be able to get pregnant naturally, and in fact, Tracy was almost a miracle. Jerry continued to make deals and earn more and more money. Shelley stayed home with her daughter and was involved in local charitable and political activities. As Tracy got older and spent more time outside the home, Shelley became more involved in the political field. 3 months later, she began working for Walter Kincaid, a candidate for senator from the state of Arizona. Jerry Spalding was happy with his day. He was in Denver and had spent most of the day reviewing contracts he had negotiated with the consortium that owned the piece of land he wanted to purchase. They were cunning, he had to admit. They identified a couple of items that he had included specifically for this purpose, but they did not realize that these were the items they were supposed to find. In fact, there were a few false leads they had missed, and he felt obligated to point them out as if they were a surprise to him. This established the atmosphere of trust he needed to ensure the deal went as planned. The best part was when they all signed the contract and the secretary, acting as a notary, certified it. This made it legal and binding, and he had exactly what he wanted. The site itself was not worth the money he paid, which pleased the consortium, who were glad that they had outsmarted the foreigner. Jerry left that impression on them as he took his copies and left. He knew what they didn't, that the site was in the direct path of an expansion that the world's largest automaker was planning right there in their city. He now owned the most important site in their expansion plans and knew how to get exactly the amount he wanted for it. Returning to his room in a rented limousine, Jerry calculated that he was on the verge of receiving a large sum from the sale of this land. Once expenses were covered and his investors were paid off, he could easily net $2 million and possibly more, and this could happen in as little as a month. This would anger the locals and please him enormously, and it would make Shelley very happy too. He thought that such an event should bring her out of the gloomy mood she had been in lately. What it was, he had no idea. He tried to mention it several times, but she refused to react, saying that it was just his imagination. They hadn't made love in almost 6 weeks. Oh yes, they had a night on 2 occasions when he insisted on it, but it was not love, it was just an intim. She allowed him to do this while trying to hide her disinterest. He was angry enough to just have an intimate, caring only about himself. She didn't complain and pretended to care about keeping him happy, but he knew better. The limo stopped, let him out, and he told the driver he was done with the ride. He tipped the driver $100 and made sure he knew his name by giving him his business card. He knew he would return and liked to leave behind satisfied people who could be useful to him in the future. He walked into the lobby of the only hotel in this small town and checked with the front desk to see if there had been any calls. They weren't there, and that saddened him, but he didn't expect her to answer his calls. She hasn't bothered herself lately. Once in the room, Jerry began making his obligatory calls. He called his partners to let them know the deal was done and accepted their praise. They were money guys, and once upon a time, he needed them more than they needed him. Now, things were different. In order to continue doing business with him and making good money from it, they had to buy shares in his corporation, a corporation that he founded himself and which specialized in real estate, but not housing or even business-related properties. Jerry bought and sold plots of land with the potential for huge profits. He was good at this and had an uncanny ability to sense which areas would be in demand and which would fail. Over the course of a few years, he made a small fortune and turned it into even greater profits. His partners were no longer involved in what he was doing, but he still kept them in the loop and offered them opportunities to get involved in some big deals. He thought it was good business practice to maintain a good relationship with them and spread the risks over large projects. It was good for all of them, and they continued to invest heavily when he said it was in their best interest. Jerry made a lot of money over the years and used it to buy the house and large plot of land that Shelley loved so much. He bought her everything she wanted, new cars, jewelry, nice clothes, everything she desired. He loved her with all his heart, and buying these things for her gave him pleasure. He thought she reciprocated his feelings, especially when they had Tracy. She was their pride and joy. But Shelley didn't want to put in the effort required to have another child. This disappointed him, but he acquiesced as he did with everything else she wanted. After he took care of his partners, he called home. He waited for the phone to ring and was only slightly disappointed when it was Tracy on the other end and not Shelley. "Hi Tracy, it's Dad. What's happening? I expected to hear from your mother, but there were no calls. Is there something wrong?" "It's okay, Dad. Mom just behaves the way she has in recent months. We were talking at dinner today, and she was just lost in her thoughts. I don't know what's wrong, but it really bothers me. I just want you to come home, and everything will go back to how it was before." "Where is she now? Can she answer the phone?" "She's in her room. She went there after dinner and never came down again. She's acting strange, Dad. Just come home, please. I'm leaving tomorrow morning and will be home early in the afternoon. Don't tell her I'll arrive a day early, I'll surprise her. I'll do it for both of us. How does that sound?" "Sounds good." "Okay, I won't say anything. By the way, I'll be back late tomorrow. We have a competition, and it won't end until 7 o'clock. See you later. Love you." Jerry hung up the phone, mulling over what his daughter had said, and was surprised that she had noticed the change as well. He packed his things and prepared to fly out the next morning. He wanted to return home as soon as possible. Perhaps he could begin to correct the situation and figure out what the problem was. It was still early morning when he arrived at his office in downtown Scottsdale after a short flight. He checked in with his secretary and received his notes. He looked through them, stopping at one that caught his attention. It was from Nikki Prescott, a good friend of his. Her husband was one of the few people he relied on early in his career. His death in an accident 3 years ago was a great loss to him, and he maintained his friendship with Nikki. He cleared his desk and then picked up the phone to call her. When she answered, he spoke calmly to her for a few minutes, updating each other on current events, and then asked how he could help her. Her answer surprised and confused him. "Listen, Jerry, you know I love you to death and I really like Shelley, but I have to tell you that I'm worried. There's something going on between Shelley and this man, Reed Cunningham. He's a major donor to Walt's campaign and has a pretty shady past. I was at headquarters and saw them together. There's something going on there, and it's not good." Jerry listened, the words causing a sinking feeling in his stomach. He knew that Nikki also supported Walter Kincaid, the very man his wife worked for. These were words coming at a time when both he and his daughter noticed that something strange was happening to Shelley, too much to be just a coincidence. "What did you see, Nikki? Is there something inappropriate?" Hoping she would say no, he waited. "Well, yesterday they left together without saying a word to anyone. They left in his car, and her car was still in the parking lot an hour later. And today, they are both gone." She had never missed a Thursday before. Walt always discusses the next week's plans on Thursdays, so none of us want to miss out. "Sounds pretty bad, doesn't it? I guess I'll have to look into this. I'm sorry I had to tell you this, Jerry, but I care about you very much. You and Tracy don't deserve this. You have always been there for me, and I want to return the favor. I pray it turns out to be nothing." They talked for a few more minutes before Jerry hung up. It took all of his self-control not to hang up the phone and drive home to confront his wife, but he knew he must first devise a plan to find out the truth. Direct confrontation was not the best course of action, especially with a cheating wife. She would lie to cover up her actions and have no problem doing so. He needed proof if there was any. Shelley woke up at the usual time and made sure Tracy was up and getting ready for school. She had gone to bed very early last night, her thoughts a tangled mess intertwined between her husband and Reed Cunningham. She couldn't stop her mind from flashing back to the afternoon with Reed. She knew it was wrong and her guilt was strong, but when she remembered his eyes, his lips, and that magnificent muscular figure, the guilt receded into the background, and her thoughts about Jerry faded. However, then she would remember her husband, and the guilt would arise again. He was the man she loved, there was no doubt about it. Jerry was her rock, her love, and her future. He was her husband and Tracy's father, and nothing was going to change that. She did worry that her actions might jeopardize their marriage, but she wasn't sure why she couldn't stop thinking about Reed. What was it about him that attracted her thoughts? Tracy was in a bad mood that morning. She put 2 slices of bread in the toaster, poured herself a glass of chocolate milk, buttered the toast, and sprinkled it liberally with cinnamon and sugar. She sat gloomily at the table and ate, not reacting to her mother's attempts to talk. Shelley tried several times to start a conversation but eventually gave up. Her daughter's despair did not cause her alarm. She watched her daughter leave for the bus and felt some relief to see her go. She needed some time alone to clear her thoughts. Jerry was to return home the next day, and then she could try again to become the wife he expected to see. She knew she hadn't been like this lately. Jerry's plane landed at the airport and taxied to the gate. As Shelley got dressed for the day, an hour later, she stood at the sink, dressed and ready to go to a meeting at Walter Kincaid's headquarters. It was a weekly planning meeting, and she never missed one. She had just finished washing a few dishes from breakfast when the doorbell rang. She went to open it, wiping her hands with a towel. She opened the door and saw Reed standing there, smiling. Surprised by his sudden appearance, she stepped back, and he took this opportunity to enter and close the door behind him. He stared at her as she stared back at him, eyes wide and mouth open in surprise. He didn't say anything but walked up to her and took her into his arms. "You look and smell great. I couldn't get you out of my head all last night, and I couldn't wait any longer this morning. I have to make love to you again." Shelley was torn by conflicting feelings. Jerry was coming home tomorrow, and she had to fight to get back to what they had and make their marriage meaningful again. She also felt a growing, hot feeling in her stomach from the contact with Reed. His pull was overwhelming, and she knew she was falling too fast. She only had one chance to say no, and that was that moment. "Please, Reed, don't do that. Please don't do this." She tried to resist, but even to herself, her words sounded without conviction, and her movements were more like an attempt at seduction. While Jerry was talking to Nikki, Shelley and Reed had just begun to betray him again. Jerry was finishing his plans as Reed walked out of Shelley and Spaulding's house. He knew what he was going to do. Jerry drove home, putting his plans into action. He decided that he would not say anything to Shelley until he had a good reason to do so. He remembered his promise to his daughter and bought flowers and Chinese food for dinner. This was enough to calm her down, something unusual, something a loving husband would do for his beloved wife. So much for pretending. Shelley was home and sitting on the back porch, holding a cold drink in one hand and a magazine in the other. Jerry stood at the window watching her. He still found her beautiful, almost more than when he married her. She had long blonde hair, worn straight with short bangs and pulled back behind one ear. Her eyes were that light shade of blue that he found stunning. She had gained a little weight, but it only benefited her. Her curves were quite impressive, and he noticed them. He reflected on their lives up to this point and had no idea why things had started to change so dramatically in such a short time. Until the last 3 months, their life had been normal, often predictable but sometimes spontaneous and always fun. Tracy was the joy of their lives, and both took part in her activities whenever possible. Jerry worked a lot but was always home on weekends and most evenings. He took Shelley with him on trips whenever possible. Then the changes began. Shelley became quiet, more tense, unusually irritable over little things, and their night life came to a screeching halt. Except for the 2 times he remembered, she had been cold and distant. He did nothing to provoke it, and when he tried to discuss it, she rejected him. Now that Nikki had called, everything fell into place. Jerry returned to the kitchen, grabbed a cold bottle of beer, put the flowers in a vase, and placed the food in the oven to heat up. It could wait until Tracy got home. He took another look at Shelley sitting alone on the porch and decided he should let her know he was home. He walked out the door, slamming it. She turned and looked at him in surprise. He thought he saw a flicker of disappointment in her eyes, but he could be wrong. "Hi, dear. What are you doing here? I thought you would only arrive tomorrow." "Oh, don't be upset. It's me. I'm just surprised. I'm glad you're home. Are you hungry?" "Not yet. I stopped for Chinese food on the way and put it in the oven. I can wait for dinner." "It's very nice of you. Tracy will be glad to see you. She felt lonely yesterday. I don't know why, but I noticed it. Maybe you can talk to her, cheer her up." "Maybe. Let's see." As he said this, he watched as Shelley's attention turned back to the magazine, and he knew his suspicions were confirmed. She was thinking about someone else, not him. The love he usually saw in her eyes when he came home was gone, replaced by indifference. The thought hit him right then, and he almost choked on the pain it caused his heart. Nothing physical could cause such pain. He turned and went back inside before Shelley saw tears beginning to form in his eyes. He quickly walked through the kitchen and entered his office, where he closed the door, turned the lock, and fell into a chair. Then he let the tears flow. Shelley had similar thoughts as Jerry stood there. She searched for the feeling of relief and happiness that he was home, but the only thoughts that came were of her and Reed. Earlier in the morning, she felt a warmth rise to her face and looked down at the magazine in her hands before Jerry could see it. She was ashamed of her thoughts but could not stop them. She was obsessed with Reed, and nothing she did made her stop thinking about him and their time together. All she could think about was the next meeting, and she was sure it would be soon. They got through the evening and the next day without letting each other know there was a problem. Jerry was silent and withdrawn, and Shelley distanced herself and showed no interest in either her husband or daughter. Bedtime was typical. Shelley was up first and already asleep when Jerry got up. Jerry and Tracy left the next morning and were out most of the day. Shelley didn't notice as she went to work, and when Reed came to pick her up, she went with him to the motel again. They stayed there until it started to get dark. She showered, got dressed, and drove home to find them missing. She made a small dinner from the leftovers and waited for them to return, thinking about Reed as she had for most of the past few months. When Jerry and Tracy returned later, they told her that they had been to a baseball game where Tracy's current boyfriend was playing. Then they had gone for milkshakes and to a movie. Jerry was sitting next to his daughter, and it was hilarious when her boyfriend tried to hug her, only to find that Jerry's hand was already there. Tracy took it in stride and enjoyed their time together. Shelley felt a small pang of guilt when she realized she didn't know who Tracy was talking about. Nothing much changed over the next 2 weeks. Shelley met with Reed twice more, pretending to be volunteering. It was the following Tuesday when Shelley announced that she was going to work at campaign headquarters for a couple of hours. She was vague about when she would return home. Jerry listened when she called and was calm when she said she might be back late. He agreed to start dinner and take care of Tracy. He hung up and then made his own call. He gave instructions to the person on the other end and told him to call back the next morning. Jerry and Tracy shared a dinner of pizza and Pepsi with hot cinnamon rolls for dessert. Neither of them really missed Shelley, and they enjoyed each other's company. Tracy once mentioned that her mother had been skipping a lot of dinners lately and was not in a good mood when she came home. Jerry allowed her to speak but did not speak negatively about Shelley. It was noted in his thoughts, however, that Shelley had made a lapse not only in their marriage but also in her role as a mother. Tracy was probably on the phone with Josh, her boyfriend, in her room, and Jerry was sitting half asleep in his chair when Shelley returned home. Jerry noted indifferently that she returned after 7, much later than the campaign usually worked. He didn't say anything when she called to tell him she was back, and he wasn't even surprised when she went upstairs and turned on the shower. He lowered his head to his chest and gave vent to his last tears. He knew it was over, and the pain was back, just as sharp as the first time. Until recently, he had maintained a faint hope that he was wrong and that Nikki was wrong. He prayed for himself and Tracy that it was just a misunderstanding and that she still valued their marriage as sacred. He had hoped it would be so, but now he was sure that it was all a lie. The reports were convincing. She lived a lie, and her promises were empty words. He controlled his anger and pushed it aside with the self-discipline he always prided himself on. He had made a fortune for them, created a home for them, and given them everything he could. He had given as much of himself as he could and stayed true to his promises to both. His promise to Shelley remained unbroken, and he was proud of it. The temptations and promises of others to make him happy were rejected. He had everything he wanted and needed at home. His wife and daughter were his life. Tracy would get the best he could offer to start her life. Her education was paid for, and everything she needed was provided so she could focus on what was important. He would make her wedding, when it came, a joyful one, and he would ensure that she and the man she chose got off to a good start in their lives together. This was a lot he could give her, no matter what happened to him in his life. He did everything he could to make sure his promises to Tracy were kept, and he was proud of this. Jerry spent the night in his office, got up early, and went to the office. He signed the final transaction documents in Denver and made sure they were properly recorded. He planned to transfer the plot as early as next month and earn $2 million from it. The people who wanted the land were Asians, and he made sure that both of those millions would go directly into his Swiss bank account, which already contained funds from previous transactions with foreign clients. Neither Shelley nor the U.S. government knew about that money, as it never came in or out of the States. The remaining amount would be duly noted and deposited in the corporation's cash register. No problems were expected with the government. As he was finishing the paperwork, the call he had been waiting for arrived. As he listened, the lump in his throat grew larger and almost made him choke from the bitterness building inside. He took notes, paused when necessary, and hung up with orders for the courier to bring the final report with photographs. Now he had the evidence he needed and the information he required. He knew who, where, and when, and this was not a one-time incident. According to his contact, it happened at least 5 times. That was enough. One time was enough to break the promise forever. Reed Cunningham owned his own company, Cunningham Cabinets and Counters, a small but very prestigious company that provided custom designs for kitchen and bathroom cabinets and countertops and handled the entire construction and installation process for those who could afford only the best. His company didn't even start for less than $100,000. Most of their work was much more expensive, and only the richest could afford them. He was in demand by those who wanted to make an impression. It was also rumored that those who wanted better in other areas could count on him to supply it. Several wealthy matrons had nothing but praise for his abilities. Jerry noted this and other things as well. Although he wanted to hurt Reed Cunningham, he didn't want to hurt a lot of innocent people on top of it. Therefore, since his employees were not at fault, the destruction of the company was ruled out. But Reed was still in the game. His family would suffer, but it would be on his conscience, not Jerry's. Jerry's family would have suffered too, but neither Shelley nor Reed cared about that. The fact that Reed was married and had 2 daughters under the age of 5 was his only weakness. The report mentioned that Reed was very attached to his wife and daughters. In his anger, Jerry viewed this weakness as vulnerability. He made complete copies of everything he had, including photographs that clearly showed the 2 of them together. The photo had made him sick the first time he looked at it, and he still felt a twinge of pain when he copied it for Reed's wife. Well, so be it. Reed and Shelley arranged everything themselves. Let them both be responsible for this. The Jerrys were no longer interested in each other. The next 2 days were full of activities. Jerry closed all his active credit cards, closed all joint accounts, and withdrew exactly half from each of them. He made sure that most of his assets were in corporate accounts that were not jointly owned and then took all of her jewelry from safe deposit boxes. He went to a jeweler he knew and had it appraised, obtaining a certified certificate of the amount. He sold the jewelry and left half the cash in her account. His lawyer made sure he knew he would have to pay alimony, but he accepted it as the cost of the divorce. Her betrayal would cost money, but she and Reed would also pay a heavy price. He stopped at the lawyer's office, signed the divorce papers, and asked that she be notified at home tomorrow at 12:15. Last but not least, he arranged for a copy of the report and photographs to be delivered to Reed Cunningham's wife for her personal acceptance at 11 o'clock tomorrow morning. He spent the last night of his marriage at home with his wife and daughter, not knowing what would happen the next day. Jerry wanted to spare Tracy the pain of divorce, but he had no way to do it. He intended to take her aside as soon as possible and tell her the truth. That was all he could do. Interestingly, Shelley tried to be friendly that evening. She tried to strike up a conversation with Tracy, but Tracy seemed reluctant to let her in. Jerry watched with amusement as Shelley began to get irritated. He was even more amused when Shelley started asking him about his work and what he had been up to lately. Jerry almost laughed out loud at this. She never asked about his work in the entire time they were married. He finally laughed, and she got angry at him. He tried to become serious, but to no avail. He eventually stood up and walked out onto the patio, still laughing. He stayed outside until he could pull himself together and then returned inside to find Tracy gone to her room. He sat down and prepared to spend another night downstairs. When Shelley spoke, she seemed angry, and he suspected that she was about to do something she thought would hurt him. Well, let her try. She didn't know what he was planning for tomorrow and that he was no longer interested in her plans. I want to go to headquarters tomorrow. They need someone to answer phones and take messages. You don't mind, do you? I know it's Saturday and I don't feel like going on the weekend, but they really need my help. Jerry almost laughed at that. He knew who really wanted her. He decided he wanted this to end, so he thought about it and replied, I need you to be home tomorrow at noon. There are some documents you need to sign, and they can't wait. I must insist. From noon to 12:30 is all you need. After that, you can do whatever you want. Shelley looked like she wanted to object but decided it would be out of character. She agreed and went up to the bedroom, thinking to herself that she would call Reed and meet him later in the day. She didn't care when, as long as they could be together. She closed the bedroom door and got dressed for bed. As she lay down, her hand automatically went to the left, where Jerry usually slept. She looked at the empty space and felt a chill run down her spine. She suddenly realized that Jerry had not slept next to her for the past few days. In fact, he hadn't slept with her for longer than she could remember. She felt tears begin to fill her eyes and allowed sadness to overwhelm her. Why did she do this? What was she thinking? Reed had somehow bewitched her, and she couldn't think about anything but him. Her marriage was failing, and it was entirely her fault. Her daughter was moving away from her, and Jerry was laughing at her clumsy attempts to talk to him. It was stupid. He could see it. What else could he see? Suddenly, she was overcome with fear that she could lose everything she loved. She knew deep down that she truly loved Tracy and Jerry more than life itself. Damn it, what was she doing? Suddenly, being obsessed with Reed Cunningham seemed stupid. The thought of him now brought only a feeling of disgust and fear. She rolled over onto her stomach and pressed her face into the pillow. She began to sob, deep, soul-wrenching sobs that hurt. How did she get to this point in her life? How did she cut Jerry out of her life so easily? How could she give herself to another man who didn't love her? She knew this about Reed. He didn't love her and only wanted her for a night. They didn't make love, they made an intim. She thought back to the time she and Jerry had recently made love and realized she couldn't remember the last time. She thought and finally remembered that they had not made love at all. Suddenly, she jumped out of bed and ran to the bathroom. When she collapsed on the bed, she felt bad. She was sweating. She told herself that tomorrow, she had to finish everything with Reed. This must stop, and she must dedicate her life to her family and Jerry again. She truly loved him. She couldn't imagine her life without him, and it scared her. Tomorrow, everything would change, and the rest of her life would be different. She would do everything possible for him. She would do anything to make amends. Downstairs, Jerry curled up on the couch in his office and closed his eyes. He cried all he could and endured the storm of pain, anger, and all the other emotions that signaled the end of 15 years of his life. Tomorrow would be the first day of the rest of his life, and he intended to make it a significant day for the two people who were responsible for it. A few minutes before noon, Jerry came out of the garden where he had spent the morning. He washed his face and hands, took off his dirty shirt and work pants, and changed into a casual shirt and pants. He gave Tracy $50 and sent her and her friends to the mall. He went into his office and closed the door, taking out the report and photographs from a small safe. He took one of Reed's enlarged photographs of Shelley and looked at it again. Now he felt only slight irritation. Great. He laid her face down on the report. He was ready. At exactly noon, Jerry opened his office door and called Shelley inside. She arrived almost immediately with a smile and sat down in the chair in front of his desk, the same place she always sat when he wanted her to sign documents. He closed the door and walked around the table. He sat down and laid out the photo face down while he waited for Shelley to get settled. She smiled at him and raised her pen. Okay, I'm ready. What do you want me to sign? Nothing yet. I want to show you something and listen to your comments. The documents you need to sign will be delivered at 12:15, so we have time. At that moment, the phone rang and Jerry picked it up. He listened for a second and then hung up. It rang again and Jerry picked it up once more. He listened, smiled, and looked at Shelley. Do you want to talk to Reed Cunningham? He's very upset and wants to talk to you. Shelley's face turned pale and she jerked her head to the side. She seemed very nervous as she answered, No, I don't want to talk to him. Tell him no. Just hang up. Sorry, Mr. Cunningham, Shelley doesn't want to talk to you at the moment. Perhaps she will see you later. Goodbye. The phone rang again, but this time Jerry let it ring. He looked at Shelley and was pleased to see her panic growing. He decided to give her a break, so he unplugged the phone cord to stop the ringing. Shelley wasn't smiling anymore. She looked at Jerry and asked, Why the delay? You know I wanted to volunteer today. Why can't we do it now so I can get there? Shelley wondered why he had called her at home. It was crazy on his part. She needed to find out what was going on, but she didn't know that Jerry was going to answer that question for her. Jerry pulled the photograph toward him, holding it up so that he could see it and Shelley could only see the back. He looked at her again, felt nothing, and smiled to himself. He could do it. He placed the photograph face up and turned it so Shelley could see it clearly. She looked down, and the forced smile on her face immediately disappeared. You know? How do you know? Oh God, not now, please. God, not now. Oh, please. Shelley's face became even paler. One hand covered her mouth, and the other grabbed the armrest of the chair. She seemed to sway back and forth, and Jerry was afraid she might faint. He watched in amazement as she actually lost consciousness. Her eyes rolled back into her head, leaving only the whites visible as she swayed to the side. Jerry instinctively tried to catch her before she fell to the floor. He didn't have time, but he picked her up and put the chair back in an upright position. Jerry went and got a glass of water. He returned to the office to see Shelley still unconscious. This bothered Jerry mainly because he wanted her to be conscious when the divorce papers were delivered to her. He didn't feel sympathy for her now. One of the papers was a restraining order prohibiting her from staying in the house, and he wanted to make sure she read it. It took some time and effort, but a picture was worth 1,000 words, and the judge was convinced. Jerry thought for a moment and, finally shrugging his shoulders, walked over to a chair and unceremoniously poured a glass of water over Shelley's head. She shuddered, choked, and came to her senses. She shook her head and wiped her face. She looked down at the photo and began to cry again. Jerry, please let me explain. I'm so sorry. Please, Jerry, let me talk to you. I was crazy. This must be it. Jerry, please let me explain. Jerry was pleased that she had come to her senses and sat down at the table again. He pulled out a few more photographs, all regular size, and threw them at her as she begged him. She barely glanced at them before she pushed them away. Take them away. They don't mean anything. Reed means nothing. It's over, Jerry. It's finished. I'll never see him again. Never. Jerry then interrupted her. He had no patience to listen to her lies and empty promises. Her actions spoke very clearly, and the meaning was clear. There are a few things I want to tell you, Shelley. It's all written down so you don't have to remember it, but here they are. First, I closed all of our joint accounts. Now they are only in your name, and only half of what was there remains. Second, I sold the jewelry. Most of them I bought for you as a gift and as a symbol of my love for you and our daughter. My love for you is now dead, and since I bought them for you, I decided to sell them. I left half of their value in your accounts. The meaning in the jewelry has died, and the jewelry itself now means nothing. Thirdly, I made sure that all the money belonging to the corporation is in corporate accounts that you cannot access. Finally, at 12:15, the documents will arrive for you to sign. I'm going to divorce you, Shelley. There's no question about it. I don't care what you say or do. I don't want you in my life anymore. You are a liar and an adulteress, and I want you to leave. Oh please, Jerry, don't say that. I regret it. I'm really sorry, and I made a mistake. I know that, and I was going to end it today. I was wrong and I understand it. It's over, Jerry, and I want to come back to you. You must forgive me, please. Jerry, don't do this. I realize what I did. At that moment, the doorbell rang and Jerry stood up. He walked around the table to take Shelley's hand and lift her out of her chair. She resisted, so he half led, half dragged her to the door. He held her while he opened the door for the courier. The young man standing there looked at Shelley and asked in a clear voice, "Are you Mrs. Shelley Spaulding?" Shelley nodded, refusing to look at him. He reached out, took her hand, and placed the envelope in it. "You have been served," he said without another word. He turned around and walked down the sidewalk. Jerry led Shelley back to the office and made her sit down again. She was too stunned to do anything other than follow Jerry's instructions. Jerry walked around the table and sat down again. "There are a few more things I need to say. I made a copy of this report and photographs of you and delivered them to Tina Cunningham's wife this morning. She now has the same information about her husband that I showed you. These phone calls were from your lover, Reed Cunningham, and he wanted to talk to you, probably to ask why I did what I did." Jerry laughed loudly, saying, "People like him never understand how those they betrayed can be angry enough to take revenge." Shelley looked at him in horror. "You didn't do it? How could you do this to him? How could you be so cruel? He has little daughters at home." Jerry responded with rage. Her words were crazy. "How could I be so cruel? Madness. I'm cruel? What the hell is wrong with you, Shelley? You are both married to other people, but that doesn't stop you from having fun with each other, breaking vows, and ruining marriages. Now you want to blame me and leave him unharmed? What the hell did I do to you to make you want to do this? Did you just want to destroy me? Is this all you were thinking about? Did you and Reed want to destroy me, destroy my marriage and my daughter's home? Is this your sick idea of some kind of imaginary justice?" "Jerry, no, this was never my intention. We never wanted you or his wife to find out. You and Tracy should never have known about my betrayal. Never. I never meant to hurt you. You were never supposed to find out, and then you wouldn't get hurt. Never, never." Jerry interrupted her denials. "Bad for your lover now. He's in a deep hole just like you. I hope it was worth it, Shelley. I tried to give you everything, and I loved you with all my heart, and I never stopped. Not until you stopped it yourself. I have been patient these past months, waiting for you to return to us, but you have gone further and further. You chose him over us. Now you got what you wanted. You gave us away. That's not what I did. I didn't want this. I never fully thought about it. Jerry, please don't reject me. Please, Jerry, please. The paperwork you received contains a restraining order prohibiting you from staying here in the house. You have 12 hours to pack your things and leave. And don't worry, I'm going to tell Tracy exactly what you did, and I don't know what she'll decide to do with you. She is old enough to decide for herself who she wants to live with. It will be her choice, but I'll tell her this is what I promise." Shelley seemed to shrink inside herself. She sat in a chair, defeated and humiliated. Jerry looked at her and found himself lacking compassion. He felt dead inside when he looked at her, and it scared him. He told himself that he would be fine once she left. He hoped it was true. "Shelley, I will be gone for a while, and I expect you to leave before I return. Tracy will be taken care of, so don't worry about her." As if you cared about her at all. With your behavior, it was clear that you forgot about her as well as about me and our promises. My lawyer's name is on the package you received. Find yourself a good lawyer and let them sort it out. You should be in a pretty good financial position since this is a community property state, but don't expect much. There will be alimony, and I'm not going to argue with that. But I planned my actions when I found out about you. Since you betrayed me, I wanted to make sure that I betrayed you in return. This was the only thing I did in recent months. Congratulations, you got what you deserve. We have nothing else worth talking about except goodbye. Jerry stood up, took off his wedding ring, and threw it on the floor in front of her. He kept his side of their agreement, and that was something he was proud of. He never betrayed her in any way and did everything possible to provide for her and love her, making their home safe and comfortable. She betrayed him. Jerry walked out of the house and into a future that Shelley was no longer a part of. The consequences can be cruel. What do you think of our story today? It seems to me that the husband is absolutely not to blame in this story, only the wife is to blame. What's your opinion? Write in the comments. See you in the comments.